Brandon, hello, my friend. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. How you doing?
I'm doing well, my friend. I'm doing well. Listen, this is the first time you've been on this podcast, so I would love it if you would just give us a quick background of who you are, where you're coming from, and how you're doing now.
Sure. I'm pretty sure we've done a podcast together before.
Yeah, that
But
was on FPC, so it's been like it's 3 years,
yeah, it goes by fast.
right?
Well, for any of your viewers who are not familiar with me, my name is Brandon Rust. I'm a self-taught agronomist and microbiologist. I've been working in the cannabis space for almost 25 years now. And I'm the owner of Bokashi Earthworks. We manufacture a microbial consortium, a multifunctional soil probiotic, and we work with NASA Agricultural Technologies, which is one of our business partners, who manufactures carbon-based humic and fulvic acid fertilizers.
Very cool. Very cool. We've been talking a lot about industrial fermentation, bokashi, EM over the last few weeks. It just kind of all lined up that all these guests were talking about similar subjects and topics. And that's why I reached out to you, is because of the work that you've been doing with Bokashi Earthworks. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the products that you produce, and then we can kind of dive into the mechanics behind them.
Yeah, so I have been cultivating for a really long time, and I've done a lot of different cultivation styles. For 11 years, I did hydroponics with conventional salt-based nutrients. I moved into soil and was still using conventional salt-based nutrients, and then I switched over to organic. I think that was around 2014 or 2015. And when I switched over to the organic side of things, I had to really relearn everything. I had to learn about plant science, soil science, biology, agronomy, nutrition, all these other aspects. And so as through the years of growing cannabis indoors with, modified growing mixes or like a living soil, um, what I found, what works best and what's the easiest way to do it, what's the most convenient without overdoing things. And one of those things was a microbial consortium that contains lactic acid bacteria, Bacillus subtilis, Pseudomonas bacteria, which is a photosynthetic bacteria, and fermentive yeast. And that, we manufacture that consortium. That's one of the things we do, and it's a multifunctional product. It can be used in a lot of different media settings: conventional ag soils, modified soils, cocoa, rock wool, DWC systems, hydroponic systems. And what it does is it allows the plant to essentially cycle or take up available nutrients from the cycling of the organic matter and the parent appetite material, or the minerals that are in a media, through microbial metabolism. So a lot of these bacteria and yeast, they produce different types of enzymes, which are, proteins that do biochemical work on different substrates. And in that process, mineral nutrition is liberated, and it's oftentimes, attached to organic matter and soluble organic matter that the plant has access to, or it will release soluble nutrient ions. Well, this microbial consortium also outcompetes pathogens as well. It utilizes the same environmental conditions, and it's just a better proliferator. When it comes to resource management, it has the ability to access nutrients because of the metabolites that they produce at a much more rapid pace than a lot of pathogens could compete at. So they can, outcompete them in that manner. They also have mechanisms where they are producing secondary metabolites that are either antimicrobial or antifungal compounds that directly, affect and kill off other species of microbes, including different types of pathogenic species. And some of these could be like volatile organic compounds. Some of these things could be, terpenoids. Some of these could be peroxide compounds. Um, there's a wide variety of different metabolites that they could potentially be released. So that's one of the things we do is we manufacture this microbial consortium, and it is done through fermentation. So the way that we operate is we add in the actual spore of the different bacteria, and then we do a solid state fermentation, and then we monitor, our temperature, our pH, and all that. And usually within 10 to 14 days, the the fermentation is complete, and we'll check the pH at the end, and we'll get a good smell, see, make sure everything's good. And so we do that. And then our partners, NASA Agricultural Technologies, my mentor, Dr. George, owner of the company, they globally manufacture carbon-based humate fertilizers. And this is manufactured from decayed organic material, which is lignite. It's a mineralized organic material. And what they're doing is they extract the humic and fulvic acid, and they also, in the process, are extracting the mineral components that are kind of locked up in a carbon-based mineral matrix. And so they micronize it down to 200 mesh, and it's reacted with different catalysts, and everything is energy conservative. It takes less energy than conventional fertilizers to do this, and the resource management is a lot better because all of these nutrients are essentially in this element, and you don't have to source a bunch of stuff to make a complete fertilizer. Most fertilizers that are being manufactured are done so by large chemical companies, and it's usually only one or maybe two different plant elements. If we're looking at something like DAP or MAP, it's just nitrogen and phosphorus. So if we're looking at urea, it's just nitrogen. And these are really highly energy intensive processes. And so we can do it at less energy, and then we're making carbon-based fertilizer. So what's happening is you're sequestering more carbon. And to get a good idea of the amount of carbon that you're sequestering, because I did a lot of calculations and doing a lot of work on this right now, the ability for carbon in the soil to increase the photosynthetic capacity of plants through all of the microbial microbial metabolites and all the chemical and biological nutrient cycling, and nitrogen cycling, phosphorus cycling, micronutrient cycling, carbon cycling. A small increase in organic matter can make a huge difference. And so when you're using these products, you're introducing carbon back into the soil. And I did some estimations. It's about 64 kilos of carbon-based fertilizer will increase soil organic matter content by 0.1%, which may not seem like a lot,
That's a lot.
but it's almost 6,000 metric tons of CO2 when we're doing the conversion from SOM, soil organic matter, to carbon dioxide. And so we're looking at, I always tell people I'm a huge advocate of like home growing and growing your own food and using natural farming practices, compost, using your chicken litter, your chicken waste, and your manures, and doing hugel pits and all that. But large scale industrial agriculture isn't going anywhere. And we've seen a huge increase in farming production over the years, which has helped decrease starvation, but it has had a lot of negative impacts on our soil, and nothing really has changed. And so what I've really decided to do is look at the logistics of how all these things work, how food systems work, how soil systems work, how fertilizer production works. How does the harbor botch process work? How much energy does that take? How much carbon does that contribute? And what's the use efficiency? And then what's the negative environmental impact? So we're looking at every single aspect logistically. And so I've created a map for a lot of how, things are sourced for fertilizers, the security of those fertilizers and how long they'll last, because a lot of these things are finite. What countries possess these resources, what geopolitical issues affect those logistics. How much energy does it take to produce these products? What's the use efficiency at the end? Um, what's those all affect cost and availability. And so what Dr. George has done is, he's created something for an industrial use. It can be used for anything. It's just the majority of our soils are poor, and that's why we add fertilizers in the first place. But the real problem is the depletion of organic matter, because they don't function the same. That's like the lifeblood of soil. It's what proliferates and gives fuel to all of the microbial processes that help solubilize the parent appetite material to make new soils and to help with soil structure and water holding capacity, all of those things, right? Obviously, if there's something that's lacking in soils, microbes aren't going to make it magically appear. A good instance, and I like to tell people, if you're missing something like manganese, your soil just doesn't have manganese, no amount of if the appetite material doesn't contain manganese, you still have to introduce it regardless. But we can do it in an ecological way that is better manageable. And again, we're all talking about logistics. And so the process that's used it's an industrial process where we're extracting the humic and fulvic acid along with the nutrients from the parent appetite material. We're doing it at less energy, with no CO2 emissions, with no waste runoff, and no environmental pollution from the actual processing. So it's a green process, and our end product by volume is 50% carbon. And so when we use a carbon-based fertilizer, we get a higher rate of photosynthetic capacity, because even though small percentages an increase will do that. And so we can measure that through data. And so that's one of the things we're working on right now currently, is looking at different research grants, partnering up with nonprofits to see, what those metrics look like, because all of the data that we have is, the last research paper that I have currently is from 2015, because these processes that NASA Agricultural Technologies that Dr. George has developed, they've been around since the 1980s. And he's had production globally and still does, but we want to bring that back to the US because it's US based technology. And the last time that it was here was 2008. There was a market crash, a lot of things got messed up, and the whole project got scrapped. So I partnered up with NASA Agricultural Technologies. We own a C corporation out of North Dakota. It's called Carbotech Technologies. It's a joint venture between our two businesses. And we've applied for, different, in North Dakota, you can apply for what's called primary sector. Their main sectors are agriculture and energy. And what ties our product together is it's made from that organic decayed mineral material, which is lignite, which is also used to power coal-fired powered plants, right? And so they're mining material for energy already, and that's one of their biggest sectors, that and agriculture. And so they do all these bioremediation projects. Wherever they mine, they have to bring everything to 100%, and they're using carbon capture technology where they're sequestering, where they scrub all, the waste and then also capture about 90% of the emissions. But our goal was, how can we introduce this technology into pre-existing technology to where some of that carbon capture, for instance, gets rerouted to factories that produce nitrogen, ammonium through the Haber-Bosch process. Now, after that process, and they precipitated the ammonium out of that process, to make urea, it takes, a huge amount of energy, where they're blending that with carbon dioxide to make urea, because it's, a nitrogen and 3 carbon molecules. And so they recycle the carbon that they capture, but they're making fertilizers, and that fertilizer has at best a 30% use efficiency. And so when we implement the use of the same material that they're already using, but turn it into a fertilizer that's carbon based, where we're able to implement the products that they also have to carbon chelate it, so that way they can have a higher use efficiency, mitigate environmental impact, and then also introduce carbon back into the soil. That's what we're doing, is we're trying to integrate ourselves into these pre-existing large-scale industrial complexes to make a change, right? So that way, instead of using conventional fertilizers that are either really acidic or really alkaline, that cause precipitation reactions that leach into our waterways, which decrease soil carbon levels, soil organic matter, we're adding a process that's going to increase the soil organic matter, increase the use efficiency from energy, from nutrient use standpoint, from ease of use standpoint, and then create healthier crop production. So, I mean, that's kind of like how we're kind of tying everything together. That's my biggest project that we're working on. And the big thing is too, I started looking at IRS tax code, and there's allocation for carbon tax credits that are built into like what we're doing as well, which is really, really interesting too. How all that works. It's all just a voluntary market. So it's unregulated, but the IRS gives and allocates credits based off of your ability to sequester carbon long term. And there's even additional types of tax credits when you're decreasing the energy costs for production of essential elements that are essential to national security. And I mean, fertilizer could be one of those things, simply because a lot of geopolitical problems result in higher fertilizer costs, because as a country, we're kind of chemically dependent.
Agreed. Well, that was quite a riff there, my friend. Let's reel it all the way back into the lignite. So the lignite's mined in North Dakota, correct?
So lignite is actually mined all across the U.S. It is a massively, massively abundant resource. At our current rate of mining, it would take thousands and thousands of years to run out. And so I've tested different sources, because when you're looking at any type of raw material, you want to know what's in it to begin with. So we want to find sources that have low heavy metals, high nutritional value, high potassium, phosphorus, high nitrogen values, high humic and fulvic acid values, high calcium, high sulfur, high low sodium. We're looking at all of the things that are essential when it comes to plants, and because a lot of these things come from plants, that decayed plants that are mineralized. But New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, Mississippi, Missouri, Illinois, North Dakota, I've tested samples from multiple places, and it's all over the place. The thing is, it's an abundant resource that America has a ton of, that's really underutilized right now. And I think that'll end up changing, though, because peak phosphorus is a real thing. Like there's only so much rock phosphorus material that contains really high amounts of phosphorus that's easily accessible, where you can just go in there with a bulldozer and go get that stuff out. And the way that phosphorus fertilizer is produced from that is they micronize it, and then they attack it with sulfuric acid, it liberates the phosphate, and then they separate that out from all the rest of the apatite material. Now, that process also takes a lot of energy, but the thing is that logistically, that resource, okay, so the largest amount is in Morocco, and that's owned by United Arab Emirates. The second largest reserve is in China, and they're starting to decrease their exports on that particular resource. We also have phosphorus in Florida. It's not, I don't think it's currently being utilized, but those things will become more scarce, and we're going to have to tap into those as we move forward into the future. And we'll get to a point where we're going to have to go deeper. We're going to have to look at other places, or we're going to have to look at sources that don't have high percentages of that phosphorus, and so it'll cost more energy. It just logistically everything increases, which increases the crop production. So something has to change. It's going to be forced to change in this regard. And so having an abundant resource that contains all of these things already is something that, I've looked at, and we've looked at what are the logistics, how easy it is to get, how cheap is it, how much energy does it take to manufacture these products. But lignite, it's also used in energy production, right? They burn it because it's a form of coal. It's basically oxidized surface coal. So they're doing surface strip mine, where they're going down 10 or 20 feet into the ground and grabbing this stuff out of there, where it's just locked up, and they use it for energy production, which again is, regardless of how you feel about coal operations, I've been to them, and for the most part, they can't do it any better than they're already doing it. From a logistical standpoint, when it comes to cheap energy, it's one of the most economically viable sources of energy, because it's so abundant, it's easy to get to. The way that it's produced and now captured with all the different technologies and incentives and carbon capture credits and all of that, all these companies have been incentivized to be more economically. And the thing is, when it comes to the logistics of wind and solar, that they can be a lot more difficult, and that's why they're oftentimes more expensive, because the upkeep, the material science behind the actual materials that are involved, and then the allocation and the management of acquiring those resources, the logistics of shipping those resources, the manning hours that come into fixing that, and then also it being intermittent, it creates problems in energy, which is directly associated with national security, especially now that we're entering into the age of quantum computing and AI. And that's a matter of national security, where we have to build these data centers, which require energy. And I know I'm going on a tangent right now, but I'm going to tie it back into what we're doing. It's going to require these types of energy sources to power the quantum and AI technology that will get us to the point where we have the sciences, the material sciences, and basically thousands of years worth of data at our fingertips, where we can change and implement different types of energy policy, nuclear and all these other things that are going to be, 0 point, and, have new material science. But until then, they're going to have to keep on building coal-fired power plants, because it's a matter of national security, because of encryption, because everything will be public. There will be no privacy when it comes to any type of digital platforms, and that includes things like nuclear codes. So they have to integrate these different ways of getting power into the US to compete with places like China and Russia. Where it ties in with what we do is, because we have all this information, we have ways that these processes can be integrated, but also capture carbon and allow those industries to grow, but keeping a carbon neutral or carbon positive footprint. We can tie it into, not just environmental sustainability, but economic sustainability, right? Because a lot of people are not looking at full pictures of, how we protect ourselves as a nation is really based off of, our economic trade and our energy output and our crop production, the quality of our medicine. Um, and again, regardless of how you feel about any of these industries, they're still going to exist. And so implementing different practices and ways that we can like change these that are actually going to be beneficial, that's kind of the goal. That's what we're working on. It's a huge, huge, huge project. It's a lot bigger than myself. We're taking all the right steps. We're looking at tax programs and all these other things and incentives. It's really interesting. I've gone down a lot of rabbit holes. I'm learning a lot.
I can tell. So I was always under the impression that they pushed the lignite off to get to the coal because the coal was harder and burned harder.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
it's,
so Bitmis coal. So Bitmis coal is a preferred, right? And you have to go deeper for that. So it requires more energy. The logistics are a little bit more intensive on that. And the reason why Bitmis coal is better is because it has a higher carbon content. That means the energy output is greater.
right.
It also has less impurities, right? When it comes to, it has a higher amount of carbon, so you'll get things like less sulfur and less sodium. And you want less sulfur and less sodium when you're burning because those are converted into environmental pollutants, which have to be mitigated, right? So, but the amount of surface coal, we're talking like it's so abundant, it's not even looked at as like a critical resource, right? Because there's so much of it. But the thing is, it's not doing anything beneficial for our soil right now because it's trapped in a mineral matrix. So if they're taking that and they're already using it for energy, and then we were like, hey, let's get that too. We're going to bioremediate all the sites and put carbon back into the soil for large agricultural crop production that can be used for American agriculture, right? Where we're increasing the protein content, the amino acid content, the sugar content of all of these, not just the carbohydrates of these crops, while mitigating environmental impact, while sequestering carbon, while still maintaining energy, but doing it in a carbon neutral, carbon positive. It's just all tied together. And so I've it's so much to like explain. It would take me hours to like show exactly what I'm doing, but my head's been spinning around for quite some time. I mean, I just found an additional $9.1 million in my business proposal, and my business proposal is only for $5 million. So it's like it drastically changes the dynamic of how I can approach getting this project lift on like to the next level, because I already have the business. We have our EIN, we have a new C Corp. It's Bokashi Earthworks, it's NASA Agricultural Technologies. We have the business proposals, we have all the defined parameters for tax credits. All I want to do is create new updated data, current market data done with ISO accredited labs, which we already have everything set in place. It's going to get wild, Morris, Leighton. It's going to get really, really wild, man. I think, no, I know that if I just keep moving forward, what we're going to do with this company, it can just revolutionize industrial ag. It can change everything. It can change everything. Like, so it's like we can just go rebuild our soils, stop damaging our waterways, rebuild our health through nutrient dense produce. Like, I'm so pumped, man. Like, and the whole thing is like, I've wanted to do this. I've shared this with so many people. I'm so passionate about it, but it's like, you can't just be like, oh, my passion is what's going to make, like, I've figured like you have to make it on paper make sense and make profitable to people who are going to want to be involved in a project like this. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like passion alone. Yeah, you can make money off doing what you love. Like I do that already. Like I do my seed breeding and all that other stuff. I have a tissue culture lab, and I have a dispensary and grow that we're building right now. It's all everything. But like this huge project, it requires so much capital to start, and it was like trying to figure out and navigate a way to where I could mitigate financial risk, and I figured it out. It's
Nice,
wild.
nice. So back to the lignite. So have they figured out, or have they had technological advances to the point where they can efficiently burn it and not just blow out all the sulfur and
Yeah.
dioxides, toxins? Interesting.
Yeah, so one of the ways they do that when it comes to the coal-fired power plants is that they actually do blends. So they'll have different mining sites where they're pulling different material. And what they'll do if they have something that has high sulfur, they'll combine it with something that has a really low sulfur. And so that way they can mitigate the amount of sulfur released, because they're required by not just the EPA, but by the state of North Dakota. And the state of North Dakota has stricter environmental regulations than even the EPA does. And so they'll do different types of blends, but the whole thing too is like through these tax incentives and through like all these, these bills that were like, we want carbon neutral, we want this. The IRS does have tax codes built in that companies take advantage of. And no, like you have to be willing to read 150 pages of tax code. Okay. Like if you don't do that, that's what I fucking did. I printed the whole entire thing and I read through it with a highlighter. That's how come I know how to navigate this now, and I had someone turn me on to the tax code in the first place. So they've implemented, and actually these are the industries that are actually storing the most carbon. They're storing millions of metric tons of carbon. And so, I didn't know about it, and I didn't have an opinion about it really one way or the other, but they invited me out there to see how everything was done, and I got to see it firsthand, and I got to go to the Lignite Energy Council's annual yearly meeting, and I met with the Lignite Energy Council. I met with the Ag Department. I met with, state legislators, Kelly Armstrong, the new governor, that was just elected, was there. I talked to all the heads of the Commerce Department. And so I think that, based off of all the work that we put in, we're going to be able to implement all these things.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
they do, they do clean it. It's like, it's as clean as it can get, I went down this rabbit hole because I have to be my own biggest critic. Like I have to criticize everything I do harder than anybody else would, because if I don't, then how am I going to be able to, if I don't have an answer, or if I don't know something, like I have to know everything about how this works, So, I looked at the logistics of a lot of other different types of energy sources, and with the implementation of what they're doing when it comes to scrubbing their air, and then also carbon capturing the CO2, it makes the most sense from an industry standpoint, from like keep employed, keeping, like when energy is cheap, it's cheap for everybody as a nation. If we can, it's only when legislation like is put in place where it's like, oh, it has to become from a new renewable resource, and when you start looking at the logistics of renewable resources, they're not really that renewable, because we have to look at like all of the raw material components that go into it. And so if that's lithium, or if that's gallium, or if that's, rare earth elements, which are very rare. If it's, you know, the manufacturing process and the output and the efficiency, like it I haven't seen it yet. You know what I mean? I think we'll see it in nuclear, but the way that we have natural gas and coal is, and someone who believes in environmental sustainability, it's probably really strange hearing that from someone that. But I had to look at the logistics, and it just doesn't make any sense otherwise, until we get to that point where we are using different sorts of energy. And when we have that, then it won't matter anymore, because unlimited energy means that we'll have the ability to create machines that just put carbon directly into the soil and build that organic matter. And so it's just all about energy. The amount of energy that we can use is what defines our civilization.
Agreed, 100%. And it is crazy, but I agree with you 100%. I've looked into the logistics. Just the friggin' wind farms, the amount of energy you put into creating the windmill, getting it to a site, setting it up, wiring it all the way back to the nearest transmission lines is crazy. And let's face it, those things are only going to last 3 to 5 years, and then they have to be replaced.
It's because of the material science isn't advanced enough. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm pro research and development, so that way we can utilize these resources efficiently. But currently, material sciences is limited. We won't be limited once we have the quantum computing, the AI technology, and we're basically 3D printing, on a molecular level, right? Because then then we can basically print materials that are indestructible, lightweight, and they will make sense. And these could be, you know, superconducting materials, and we'll get there eventually. We'll get there, but in the meantime, something has to be done, because it's just a matter of health and disease and all the things that come from having inappropriate soil conditions.
Agreed, 100%. And that's it too. Is on a nutshell is that although we are probably one of the leaders in these advanced material sciences, we don't have the manufacturing, cost-effective manufacturing, to produce a lot of this stuff. So yeah, we're stuck in it. We're trapped in a quagmire between, oh, we don't want to pollute the planet, but at the same time, in many cases, we are actually doing more damage by working in that industry of substandard materials, technologies that are currently being used in everything from the wind turbines to the solar panels to everything.
Yeah, so if we were to look at like something like solar, for instance, okay, we're going to need X, Y, and Z materials that come from X, Y, and Z country. They're going to be manufactured in this country, imported over here. They're going to be built, and then they're going to last until a hailstorm comes. They're going to have to be replaced. And so it's like you have to think on the lines of, real sustainability versus like, okay, we have a shit ton of this material. Our energy is going to be produced right next to the raw material. The raw material is just going to get produced right there. Energy can go out anywhere because energy travels on a line.
Yep, makes all the sense in the world. And again, it's the environmental side that is not using misinformation, but using lack of information to drive decisions that are irresponsible in many ways, because they don't have all the information to make an intelligent decision. And again, this was nowhere near what I had in mind for this conversation today, but I love it because, to tie this full circle back into soil health, it's a critical conversation that's not being had, because let's face it, when you when you're trashing the environment to make these things that are supposedly better for the environment, what did you really do? Right? So thank you for sharing all of this, because this is definitely a new development. I had no idea you were playing in this world.
Yeah. So, the thing too is where we tie into energy is if you look at conventional fertilizer, it takes about 66 million BTUs to make a metric ton of ammonia, and it takes another like 22 million BTUs to make convert that ammonia into urea. And that's just one element. That's nitrogen. It has a 30% use efficiency at best. And then anything that's not stored in the soil ends up in our waterways, or and so it's like we look at like the amount of energy used for production of these essential resources that we have, like there's like it doesn't make it you like just it doesn't make sense to me why this hasn't already been like put into place, and like people have really looked at this, because when it comes down to it, there's been a better way for such a long time. But again, Dr. George is 90 years old, and so he doesn't have the youth that I have to be able to spread the message and kind of implement all of these systems. But man, we have done some footwork. We are applying for primary sector out of North Dakota, which means we have tax credits for 5 years. We don't have to pay payroll tax. We don't have sales tax. We don't have any state associated tax with the business for 5 whole years. And it's because they want businesses like ours and people with the ideas like I have to be able to improve the main sectors of business that they're already involved in. And energy and agriculture are what they do. And so I've had a ton of interest. Now it's just a matter of raising capital.
Oh boy. Yeah, I know how much fun that is. It's been been a couple of minutes since I've been on a team trying to raise capital. It's just no fun at this time. There's a lot of factors outside of one's control, whether they be political, whether they be the lack of free money that was floating around for startups for so many years, and that's pretty much all dried up. And then, of course, people's fears. It's a very fearful world right now, especially in the financial circles, because it's whether, what's going to happen. Is BRICS going to take over the US dollar? Is the US dollar going to crash? Is Bitcoin going to step in? And so those that have money that typically were pretty aggressive investors have lost their appetite in these risky kind of, even though they're not risky, in their minds, they are risky. It's not like
there's always risk associated with investment. And that's one of the reasons why we started looking at carbon tax credit, because it can help mitigate risk. And a good example of this is, I took the last research study that was done. It was done on potatoes. They did 3 acres and they used 192 kilos of humate fertilizer over 3 acres. And they increased the soil organic matter content by 0.1%. Now, that may not seem like a lot. That's just 1/10%. But when you're talking about a furrow acre slice, which is 2 million pounds, 3 acres would be 6 million pounds. 0.1% of that is a huge amount. And so what we're able to do is look at how much carbon is sequestered per kilogram of humate fertilizer, and it actually comes out to 30.16 kilograms. And so we can write that in, and that's what we did, because it offers an incentive as a tax credit for investment. And what's interesting is based off of our manufacturing capacity, we'll actually have $9.1 million worth of tax credits. Our business proposal is $5 million. So it's actually $4 million in tax credits more than we would actually need for the project to start the whole entire thing. So it's really, really interesting when you start looking at IRS tax codes and how these things can be leveraged. Not only that, but carbon tax credits, they can be sold to a third party, which is really interesting. So what this is called a voluntary voluntary compliance market. So it's kind of like how Bitcoin was. Voluntary compliance, there was no regulations around it. There will be regulations now that Trump's coming into office around Bitcoin, but it was freely traded. You could, if you chose to or decided to participate in the market, the IRS gives about $20 per metric ton as a credit, but those credits are publicly traded like stocks, and they usually range anywhere from $20 to $50 per metric ton. And so there's ways that you can basically sell and trade carbon credits that are, that are allocated through the IRS. It's really interesting. And so I figured it all out. I figured out how to do it. And so I'm just writing all the paperwork out, and I'm working on all the reporting, and I have to report to the Department of Energy, the IRS. You have to do ISO accredited, EPA accredited lab research, and all kinds of other stuff. But it'll happen. It's going to happen this year.
Good for you. Good for you. So let's talk a little bit about the yields on that 3-acre potato site. Did you do, I'm assuming you did nutritional testing as well as yield and the side-by-side and all that. So fill us in.
So the side-by-side was done with conventional fertilizer. The control was done with humate fertilizer. So it was 3 acres and 192 kilos total of humate fertilizer. So it was one application of high nitrogen formulation. It was one application, and these are about a month interval, so about 4 weeks apart. The second application was the complex, which is a kind of even distribution of NPK. And then the last 2 were the high potassium formulation, and this was for potatoes. And so it was 4 fertigation events, drip fed over 3 acres. Each fertigation event was 48 kilograms of humate fertilizer over the 3 acres. And what we saw was an increase of about 26% in overall yield of potatoes. There was also a part in there where the actual mutation or the formation of the potato, where it wasn't like deformed, decreased by over like 78%. There's a bunch of different factors. I was reading through it today, but I can't remember everything off the top of my head. The most important thing that I was looking for was the increase in soil organic matter from 1.2 to 1.3%. And I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but again, we're talking about 6 million pounds of soil. So the amount of carbon that was sequestered through this, through both the fertilizer itself and increasing photosynthetic capacity and introducing, the carbon through root exudation, that's how it's measured, is, again, almost 5,700 metric tons per acre.
That's significant, dude. So you had a higher yield of 26%. You had a decrease in mutation, which is, I think, a bacterial fungal.
There was a 1% increase in protein, 1.5 increase in starch, and 1% decrease in water content as well.
Nice. Did you get the energy reading on that one? So energy is used to consume it. In other words, when you eat it, your body needs to use so much energy to consume it.
No, that wasn't part of it. It was just looking at the nutritional density of the food, and then looking at some of the nutritional profile, things like NPK, the pH, the carbon, the soil organic matter content.
Interesting. Well,
we're going to read. Look, this was from 2015. This was, this is 10 years old. So it's all this stuff is going to be updated, and I have no doubt. Again, I'm a biggest critic. I probably will see even higher percentages because we have so much more data on crop production, and I am really, really good at the crop management side to look at the soil data to begin with. So
Yeah.
we're it's a roller coaster ride right now, but it's all a process. And yeah, I mean that's what we're doing. We're selling carbon-based fertilizers on the Bokashi website, and we're selling the microbes that we manufacture here in Oklahoma City. We sell things like microbial consortiums like Bacillus subtilis and Trichoderma, and things like additives like Kiaha. So we're doing things that are all just kind of work synergistically together that are great for regenerative agriculture, crop production, that decrease environmental impacts of everything, even if they were applied before you started using these things. So that's what we're doing, man. It's a lot, but
Keeping you busy and out of trouble.
yeah, I'm not getting into any trouble.
So what was the cost comparison in the potato study? MTK.
Well, so when you're looking at the cost comparison to conventional fertilizers, the like let's say you might pay $7,000 for a metric ton of humate fertilizer, and you might only have to pay 900 or $1,000 a metric ton of DAP, right? But DAP would just be phosphorus and nitrogen, no carbon, and then you'd have to use exponentially more, right? Because it has a lower use efficiency. So when you're looking at the cost, it's actually equal to or a little bit slightly less, but you can't look at it at like, oh, I'm paying 900 for a metric ton and I'm paying 7,000 per metric ton over here, where it's like, okay, well, you have a 96% use efficiency with our product versus a 15% with your product. And then you're also looking at the amount, like you might be using a metric ton of fertilizer on your 2 acres versus using 192 kilos on 3 acres. So you're looking at the amount that you're actually using, not just cost comparison, metric ton versus metric ton. So that's not how we can, if you're trying to compare metric ton for metric ton, we're not even operating in the same place, because conventional fertilizers is usually 1 or 2 different amendments. Humate fertilizer is NPK, sulfur, magnesium, calcium, micronutrients, carbon, humic and fulvic acid.
Yep. No,
The amount that you're using is less, way far less. The use efficiency is so much higher. So it's more cost efficient, and especially over the long-term use, because you're going to end up gradually using less, because what happens is when you build up your soil organic matter levels in your soil, they hold on to more nutrition for over time. So if you have humic acids, it increases your your CEC, and so you have long-term storage of nutrition, and you're just all the nutrient cycling and everything that goes along with that. So you're increasing your soil fertility, and you're using less over time. So if you were to increase your soil organic matter by 0.2% every year, it would take you 1 year to get to an increase of overall of 1%. Now, the difference between 2% and 3% is exponentially larger than one would think when you're actually looking at the math and how much carbon is in that furrow acre slice by volume, by weight.
And another thing that we as a species don't talk about is the value of carbon. Carbon is like a building block. So
Yeah, well, Did you know it's publicly traded? It's I think I mentioned it earlier. Um what is it? How do they say it? It's an unregulated, non compliant, like voluntary compliance market. Like if you want to trade in it, you can. And so you could trade them like stocks. There's Vera. If you go to Vera, you can see all the different companies that have carbon credits that are being traded, and those things operate like a stock market. And here's the thing. I just learned about this, and look at, you can even like map your own carbon credits as an individual. And if you're like farming and doing stuff like that, you can get carbon credits and apply for those through these calculators, and you can sell them off to other companies. It's so strange, dude. It's like Bitcoin pre-Bitcoin. So the way that the carbon credits are generated are through IRS and tax code or different federal programs allocation of credits. And they'll say these are only worth so much. You have to do all of the work to apply for these, but once you applied for them, they can increase in value because it's an open market that's traded.
Yep, hear you 100%.
And so I'm just learning about this, and yeah, so I'm gonna start going even further down this. I'm gonna keep doing this because there's one thing that I know. I've never been fucking wealthy. I'm not wealthy, but I know that wealthy people get wealthy by mitigating taxes. So however they can navigate the tax code to their benefit, they do that. If it's tax breaks, if it's this, if it's subsidies, if it's this, every single person in the whole country has access to that. It's just about if you're willing to read 150 pages and do the work and look at all the things, so it's like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start training myself on all the work and how to do the work. It's bokashiearthworks.net.
Oh, glad you caught that.
Yeah, for the website, it's .net.
Okay, I'll change it.
No worries. And so, it's I'm gonna try to take advantage of that because I actually like want to. I want to like really make a difference because we have the technology. There's no reason why it can't be implemented, and so yeah, that's my project. I'm still working on all the weed stuff though too. I got a little dispensary and grow. Instead of going huge, I was like, I'm going hella small. So we got like a little 3,000 square foot building, and we only have 14 lights and flowering, 2 4-light rooms, and then 1 6-light room. We have a mom room, a nursery, drying and curing. We have a little warehouse. We have a dispensary, a little office. We went micro though, so our overhead's super low. We're going to produce everything for our own dispensary. It's in a good area that's being developed and kind of gentrified right now. So yeah, dude, we got that going on. I just got my hemp license actually awarded today, so I'm turning on my tissue culture lab. We're going to be offering embryo rescue, micropropagation, and storage, and meristem tissue culture through that, and we'll be offering tissue culture propagules through the bokashi seed vault bokashiseedvault.com website, along with that's where you can find like my genetics, which is like just a passion project. I was like, I'm gonna do this regardless. I don't do a lot of breeding for the market. It takes me fucking forever to do projects, so I'm not like, I don't rely on projects. I don't rely on making seeds for income. So I don't release a lot of stuff like consistently like seed banks do and stuff. Most of my stuff is pretty similar. I do a lot of work with the Black Lime Reserve and my Lime Marilla and my Blueberry Train Mac. And sometimes you can get it if it's not sold out. So all that's kind of one little entity. And then yeah, dude, I got a lot of irons in the fire.
Yeah, you always did. All right, so let's talk about your solid state fermenter. How big is it?
Oh, so what we did was I got some cone bottom tanks that have airlocks on them, and I'm just using 110 gallon, And the reason why is I tried doing, like totes, like 250, 275 gallon totes. I've done that. 55 gallon barrels, easy. You can ferment those all day long. I had to increase my manufacturing capacity, but I didn't want to sacrifice the quality. And so what I did is I did 110 gallons, which is basically 255s. And it allows me to do small batch, but instead what I did, instead of doing big ones, I divide out multiple 110 gallons. Instead of doing like, oh, I'm going to do 1,000 gallon or I'm going to do 500, I do smaller batch individuals, and that helps me ensure product quality. Because if something, I mean, I haven't had anything ever happen, but if something were to happen where like something's like, oh, this does not smell right, or this isn't sitting right with me, and it was 1,000 gallons versus like 10. So there's one way to mitigate any type of risk, but also to just keep all of the measurements for everything really precise and consistent for like, our additives when we're adding in the spores and we're adding in the feedstock. We want to keep measurements really precise. And so I'm just doing 110 gallon cone bottoms, and then we have multiples of those, and we have them all hooked up so that we can fill all of our bottles and stuff after fermentation's done.
Nice. Are you using any aeration or any CO2 gas or anything, or is it just
No, this is just anaerobic fermentation. So all of the microorganisms that are in this consortium. So when we're talking about lactic acid bacteria, bacillus, like Bacillus subtilis, Rhodopseudomonas, and Saccharomyces, they all have the ability to kind of change their modes of metabolism. So they can operate, like, here's a good example. The Pseudomonas is a photosynthetic bacteria. It can acquire sunlight for energy. It can capture CO2 as carbon, but it can also work through it's a chemioautotroph as well, so it can use light energy and chemical energy, like chemical energy in the form of the breakdown of carbon compounds. So it can also go through, fermentation. So it's got these different modes of metabolism, and all of them have fermentation in common. And so what happens is when you go through the fermentation process, they all proliferate. And so we're growing, we're basically growing the populations and concentration and converting the feedstock into secondary metabolites. So what happens is you grow the microbial populations, they increase until there's no more feedstock. While they're feeding on that feedstock, they're producing all of these chemical compounds, these secondary metabolites. Some of these could be things like, auxins, like indole-3 acetic acid. They could be things like cytokinin or gibberellin, or they could be phosphatase or amylase or chitinase, or they could be amino acids, or there's just a huge, they could be volatile organic compounds, antimicrobial compounds. They could be, some of them are going to be mono and polysaccharides. They're basically creating all of this huge diversity of carbon based compounds. And then once there's no more feedstock, they endosporulate, and they basically encapsulate their DNA, or they convert into a non-active form. So that way, when they're introduced into an environment where they have adequate resources, they all just come back alive. And the benefit is when you're adding those microbes to your water and watering it in, you're getting all of those, the colony forming units. And they call colony forming units because they form colonies. They may not be running around because they've already ate all that feedstock, but they're going to reemerge once they're in the environment where they have more access to carbon and more access to water and more access to nutrients. But so they're going to be introduced, the biology, but also the introduction of all of the compounds that they have produced, right? And so that's what actually does all the work, is all of the metabolites is what does all the biochemical work on your soil. Whether it's the mineralization of phosphorus from parent apatite material, from phosphorus to phosphate, or whether it's converting ammonium into nitrate, or converting amino acids into ammonium, whatever the process might be, all of it is really responsible for that to do that biochemical work is the metabolites, the things that those bacteria are producing.
Extra polymetric substances.
Yeah.
That's a good catch-all phrase for all of that stuff. Yeah, this is exactly the reason why I was excited to have you on here, is because for the last 2 years I've been working on a project through Ecosphere Sciences, which is a aerobic digestion. It's not a sealed vessel, but it does create those second and tertiary metabolites that you're talking about that are just so powerful in the soil and for the microbial populations, both in situ in place or the ones that you're trying to introduce or inoculate with. So how many different species of bacteria do you have? I think you at one point told me like 13 or something.
No. So we had it tested at, I think there's 7, but 2 of them I don't list, because if I did list them, I'd have to do additional EPA registration. And it's just because they're like, oh, well, this has been already registered as a biopesticide or something like that. So if you list this, you're going to have to change your labeling to this is a biopesticide. And then you're going to have $200,000 worth of research, or you're going to have to buy that efficacy data from another company that's already done it.
Yep.
So it's a lot of kind of bureaucracy when it comes to it, because you either have to buy the data or pay for the data, even if that certain microbe is already registered with the EPA as safe. Mm-hmm. And so the option is to just not list it. So I have 2 lactic acid bacteria that aren't listed. I have 3 that are listed, and then Bacillus subtilis, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and then the Rhabdopseudomonas plustrius. So photosynthetic bacteria, fermentive yeast, the Bacillus subtilis is great, and then a couple of lactic acid producing bacteria.
Nice. And in many ways, like this really is an EM. It has the 3 mains and then some additional.
So instead of using a mother culture from like Terraganics, because they produce their own mother culture, I use actually spores. So I have a friend who owns a biotech company, and their family supplies me with all of the actual spores for the product, and so I do all the management. The thing is, I can't call it EM because EM is actually a trademark. EM is not. It's actually Terraganics owns the North American trademark for it. But according to their labeling, they only have Bacillus amylocufinchus. I'm probably butchering that. And I do I'm just going to say it straight up. My product is so much better than EM1. It is so much better. And the reason why is because I don't skip out on my feedstock. I use high quality feedstock. I do great quality control. And then I am way underpriced from what they're charging. And I have higher colony forming units and a higher diversity of microbes in that product. So they are not listing, they're only listing one of it. Even if they have more, I actually have listed and have the tests for all of the stuff that's in mine. So my shit is banging.
I was actually supposed to have the crew from Terragenics on last week, and I had to cancel last minute.
Yeah,
because we're on a roll with this.
I think they switched ownership. I think they got bought out by a different company, and then if I remember correctly, the original owners and still work with them in some capacity, but it's not the original owners. And I know this because I work with another company that manufactures bokashi on a large scale, because I stopped manufacturing bokashi because it's so labor intensive, and so I work with another company. And that they were using, you know, EM in their production before they switched to my product, which is one, more cost effective and higher concentration.
I wondered why you stopped doing bokashi.
It's so labor intensive. When you try to scale it out, when you know, if like, it's difficult. You need industrial equipment, and I wasn't willing to go spend the money to do it because, again, it's one of those things where I'm looking at the logistics of my business, and like if I was to scale it out, it would have to make sense where I'm selling metric tons of the stuff, and I have contracts in place previously with providers, and it's like, to do that, I'd have to build up all these different new networks. I'd have to build up new contracts. I'd have to do so much footwork, and the allocated time and resource on my part, it didn't make sense financially when there's already companies that are doing it, and I could just say, hey, you know what, you want to just, let's do some drop shipping where, you know, a lot of people don't know that you're doing this. We can put this on my website. Doesn't cost me anything. We both make money, and people get a super high quality product that works really well.
There you go. There you go. Again, you know, it's often in partnering that you are way more successful than if you just try to build an empire.
Yeah. Well, you can't build an empire by yourself.
I know plenty that have tried, my friends.
It doesn't work that way. Look, here's the thing. Like, I have other business ventures that like, people that I already work with, like my marketing director for Bokashi Earthworks, my boy Hamilton, who works with the company. I have a friend that does multimedia. I was like, dude, let's create a marketing company so we could do marketing. We take brands and do brand advertisements. We can do this. You guys are already doing this, and we're already working together. Let's make it into a company. You guys are going to generate additional revenue this way. It's like, you guys are already, you know, like, any time I see an opportunity to put people together to try to like monetize something that we're already doing, but do it in a more professional manner, then I try to like make that happen, because I want all the people around me that I'm working with to be financially successful. Because, like, if we're going to build our dreams and change the way agriculture is done and change, you know, things in a manner that actually makes sense, as opposed to, like, you know, because there's a lot of rich, I'm just going to diverge for a second. There's a lot of wealthy people out there that have huge aspirations, like Elon. It's like he wants to do rockets and all this stuff. It's like, you could be investing that money into things that actually make a difference. Like, invest in the soil science, invest it in a commerce, and invest it in a energy. Like, stop focusing on goals that we ain't never going anywhere in fucking gas powered rockets. Like, all that's going to come from 0 point energy. It's all going to come from understanding physics. Like, all that shit's a sham. Like, all these expense, like, there are people that get put in place that could really make change that don't. That, like, so it's like, I want to be able to bring the people along for a ride and actually implement change that actually makes sense, makes a difference. Because I see a lot of fucking bullshit. I just keep seeing a lot of dumb stuff, and when you break it down logistically, it don't make fucking sense.
Agreed.
You know, a lot of stuff that's happening in the world. It's like, come on, there's so many better ways. The people can be innovative. We are not stupid. We're not limited. Like, we can, like, all this stuff can be done. So I'm just trying to figure out the best way to approach it and make it make sense to people who are willing to take the initiative and write me a damn check.
I hear that, my friend. I hear that. So the dispensary business is good.
So we are actually doing our build outs. We're transferring the dispensary this week, which it could take a couple months or whatever. We're doing some stuff on the grow build out. We hope to open 420 or a little bit before 420. But the thing is, like, that's just an extension of what I already do. So I already home grow. I already grow great product in my soil beds and everything. And, you know, it's just an extension of that. We have a really low overhead over there. We're not doing anything giant, like, you know, our labor cost is small, just everything is small over there, but we'll still be able to produce, 140 pounds of weed annually out of a small place, and then, sell it direct to, our customers. So it'll be profitable. We'll also have a hemp license, so we'll be selling genetics and clones and cuts, and have a small nursery and stuff like that. So it's not my main focus. It's just another stream of revenue, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build multiple streams of revenue that can become passive revenue. So that way, when I'm focusing on different projects, I don't have to rely on outside investment. I can keep equity in my companies, through the revenue that's already generated through, other companies that I have. I can just borrow from my other companies, pay myself back, and I don't have to be subservient to, like, um an investment firm, because I'm taking investment capital, but I'm not, like, the amount of equity that we're giving for this project is not going to be enough to where somebody could take over the business, because we always want to maintain ethics and values, which have to be the core foundation of what we do. And so, you know, I've got a bunch of stuff. Again, just a bunch of stuff, dude. Bunch of stuff going on. I got this Del Monte thing, Del Monte International. I can't speak too much on it because we already signed an NDA, but we're going to be working with Del Monte to um, help with some regenerative agriculture practices, bio-green waste recycling, and stuff like that.
Very cool. Are you still working as a consultant to other growers?
Not so much. I don't have the time. If I was going to get involved in a project on, like, a consulting side, I'll do limited consulting. But when someone comes to me and says, "Hey, I want to do build outs. We need this. We need this. We need this," I have to have. I would have to have a percentage of that business, because otherwise it doesn't make sense, for me to get involved, because it's taken me so long to build up the networks that I have to make things run smoothly and perform these types of operations. Not only that, but we have, marketing, and we have distribution through some of my channels, and to bring all that in, I wouldn't know how to value it from a consulting standpoint. I can only value it from a business perspective, and why it makes sense from a business perspective to do it as an equity partner. So I'm too far into what I've been doing um, to really get involved with projects, if I'm not directly, like, a partner on it. It's too much time, and if there's the return on it, I have to focus my time on, what's gonna be the most financially feasible. Again, because all these projects that I have going on, they're all contingent on, being able to generate revenue. So if we want to make a change, unfortunately, the way we work in a capitalist society is, those dollars have to make sense.
Agreed. 100%. How's your battery doing?
My battery is fine.
Nice. How is the state of affairs in the cannabis world in Oklahoma at this point?
Everything is changing slightly. So a lot of the bigger players that, overscaled and got involved in way too many places at one time are all, pretty much going out of business. A lot of the mom and pops that were, like, in it to win it, they're still going. Prices are going back up. Quality of flower is, inconsistent. Depend on the cultivator. Some people have got great flower. Some people still don't produce great. The people that do produce good flower are getting an increase in price, and there is less flower on the market now. So overall, it's just how it always goes. There's ebbs and tides when it comes to cannabis markets. A lot of people got in early, went too big, lost out. A lot of people are dropping out. There's still more people dropping out. There are other people like myself that are going back in. It's really just about understanding the logistics of the business. If we're looking at cannabis cultivation, the margins on net revenue are about equal or maybe slightly less than running a restaurant, which is about 3 to 7%. If you're a really good operator, you might get 8 to 12. So trying to figure out, how to decrease your overhead. That's why we went small. We have our rent and lease is extremely low. It costs less than probably a 1-bedroom apartment in California. Maximize space, maximize efficiency when it comes to labor, power, inputs, water. Leverage all the connections that we have to be able to get sponsors to sponsor us with equipment. All those things will help us be a little bit more successful. Plus, I think people know who I am, and they know that the work that I do is consistent and solid, and everything that I sell and promote and the education I give is, solid. So I think people are just willing to hop on board with what I'm doing because I'm willing to be there and help them, and they know they can rely on the quality and the consistency of what we do. That being said, I mean, it shouldn't be too difficult to do this. I've got great business partners on the Dispo Grow. They already run a dispensary. I mean, we're just basically scaling up because, I've got my home grow and I love it and I do it, and it's just, hey, now I can be operating on the legal market again, and it's time because a lot of other people went out of business. A lot of the big players are gone.
Which is great. It makes way for innovation and craft. So
Yep.
that's good to hear. And speaking of which, are you going to be focusing on flower, hash? What is the?
It's all going to be flower. So we have one room dedicated to just a perpetual pheno hunting, where it's called the Battle of the Breeders, where it's a 36 bucket room. So there's 9 plants per 1,000-watt light. And it's going to be one variety from one breeder under each light. So we'll do 4 varieties, 9 phenos of each variety every single run. And we'll do like a thing where we're doing cross marketing and branding, and we turn it into like a YouTube series with hopes of turning it into a series for a live streaming platform. And essentially, we're just, we're doing grow science, cultivation science, cannabis history, kind of all entwined into like the genetics and practices of cultivation. People can look at different breeders' work, and then we're going to offer like basically flights out of the dispensary. So like the Capulator variety, whatever it is we did, it'll have those 9 different phenos, a gram of each. You can buy that in the dispensary, and all fancy packaged and all that stuff. And kind of the community basically judges what they like best, and that's how we judge the competition.
Wow, that's really cool.
Okay.
That's so. How many different flights are you going to have? You said I lost track of you there. You have 9.
It's a total of 14. So there's 2 4 light flowering rooms, and then a 6 light flowering room.
Got you. But as far as the breeders or the phenos you're going to be playing with, those you have 4 different breeders that are coming in there, and each one has 9 phenos.
You're on mute, Brandon.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so what I'm doing is I'm taking a couple of seed packs from whatever variety I get from that particular breeder, and I'm, sexing them and getting 9 females from each variety, and those are what's going to get flowered. So there'll be 9 phenotypes of every variety. So you can pick which was your best, and essentially, so like if you were to go in there and you're like, I want every single flight. So we might have Cap Junkie, In-House Genetics, Green Bodie, Mean Gene, right? Those might be the 4 lineups on that last run, and every single breeder has one variety but it's 4 different phenotypes from something that they bred. And then we'll offer that in a flight, right? And so they can get and they can judge it, they can get involved in the whole process. And it was a way that we thought we could, cost brand, market, but also create community engagement. Not only that, but those phenos that are selected by the consumer through their judging of each flight, those genetics will be offered to the public through our hemp license.
Got you. That's where I was trying to get to. So it'll be basically 32 individual varietals of 4 different breeders, and the female stock, the plant material, will be saved until the population votes on which
so
one.
at our dispensary and grow, I have a tissue culture lab there as well. It's like a little mini tissue culture lab. So we'll be able to store in tissue all of that material, put it on the back burner, run our pheno hunt. It'll take 60 days to harvest. And we'll know at the end, hey, this is the one. We'll pull out all the ones. We'll get rid of the other ones. We'll mom those up. Then we'll offer them as Gen 0.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. This is pretty much typically where we stop and answer questions. Plus, I got to get up and close the shade before I get blinded here. So, Ken, why don't you go ahead and hop on and let's get these questions answered.
Yep.
Sure. Sounds good. Let's see. We'll start with this one. Are you going to Cannabis again?
Maybe. I want to. I definitely want to go back out there again, but I have no idea what the future holds right now. In the moment, if I am needed here, I'm going to be here. If I can get out there, I'm going to go out there.
How was it last year?
Oh, it was great. Yeah, it was awesome. Spain's great. Hey, I'll tell you what, you can really gauge how shitty American food is by leaving this country and eating well for 10 days.
Yes.
Yep.
I learned that when I went to Greece. The food was just insane.
Yeah, it's like whatever, genetic selection they did on our wheat, they didn't do it proper because the whole thing is we're over there and we're eating and drinking and having a good time and smoking, and it's great, and you don't feel bad because the food that you're consuming isn't shit. And then you get back to the US and you fucking eat a fucking cheeseburger and then you're just like crashing.
Yep.
It's bad.
Yep.
Yeah. So I had a lot of fun. I met some cool people out there. One of the interesting things is like it's a congregation of a lot of the US based like cannabis people. The people that are in it, like all the hash, all your favorite hash makers, all your favorite educators, all the guys that used to write for High Times, like you get all of it's US based cannabis people all in one area. It's weird. It's cool. I had a lot of fun.
So how was the quality of cannabis that you smoked over there? Was it top shelf or was it mids?
It was the same. I mean, I think globally there are people that do really well at their craft and there are people that are mediocre. So it ranged from super high quality to mediocre. And that's exactly what I expected, that you can go into some areas that may be underdeveloped. A good example of this is when I did the Organic Cup in New York, the first year that Organic Cup was there. Most of the samples were subpar, and it was stuff that I wouldn't even want to smoke. I was just like, yeah, this is like I have a certain standard. This is below my standard. I can't judge this. That's not the case anymore. You go back to New York, and it's just on par with anything else that you see in California, Oklahoma, Michigan. It doesn't matter where you're at, man. People like. It's not hard to grow good quality weed, especially if you're passionate about it and you don't overdo it. And so everywhere I go, I see good weed.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Well, that's good to hear because I know I had heard the similar thing about New York was was pretty sketchy when they first came out, but it has improved significantly. So anyway, sorry, Ken, you want to tee up the next one?
Sure. They want to know if you ship seeds to Australia.
I'm sure we could, but I don't think we do. I just don't like messing with customs, because what happens a lot of times is you might send it and it might be cool or whatever, but then customs takes it and then you got to refund the customer and you're out shipping and all that other stuff. So
And how about the rest of your products? Do you just ship in the U.S.?
only U.S. based.
Canada?
U.S. based right now. We don't have any distribution in Canada. And also Canadian registration takes about $200,000 in about 2 years.
Mhm.
So it's a very arduous process that I'm frankly not willing to go through right now. I am working on EU, so finalizing contracts. It's been months of going back and forth. Working on that. Hopefully within the next month that'll be finalized, and then we can, a couple more months it'll be out in the EU and Germany, Spain, UK, all that good stuff.
Cool.
And then also in South America, there's access, not through my website, but we have Bokashi Earthworks EU, which is getting, my partner's kind of been waiting on some label registration and stuff for Mexico so that we can do that on Amazon and online and stuff like that. So there's stuff that's going to be coming up. It's just, I don't know what I don't know, so I have to figure out all the business shit.
That's a whole nother stack of paperwork you got to read through.
Yeah, probably another 150 pages.
Yeah,
at least. Yeah. So I got a good question. How cold can wild plant take? They reseeded and sprouted in October and now have 10 degrees and 10 inches of snow and look fine. So basically they're wanting to know more about winter kill and stuff like that. Can you grow cannabis in, the colder weather?
Kale or cannabis?
I think it's cannabis.
Cannabis. Yeah.
Well, so I had some plants that were a little bit seeded from my outdoor stuff last year, and while I was harvesting, I was just chucking the seeds on the ground. And they all popped up after the season, and it snowed here. I haven't gone outside and looked to see if they were still alive, but they were alive a couple days ago, and it was pretty freezing. They weren't growing or doing anything. I do not suspect that they will make it all the way through February. Is the coldest month of the year. If they did somehow make it, it would be amazing. I mean, but I don't think they're going to make it. No.
Well, I do know some guys here in Canada that plant their seed in the fall so they can come up first thing in the spring, and they do survive through the spring, cold weather.
That's the seed though, like not already popped, right? Yeah. So what happened with mine is they popped, and they're actually little plant seedlings.
Yeah.
4 or 5 inches tall. I didn't do anything to them. I'm just gonna die.
Well, refertilize the soil. That's perfect organic material for the cannabis plant. Is the cannabis plant
Soil organic matter.
Now, the next question is, are you still king of crop steering like in the FCP days?
Oh, bio crop steering. Yeah, I mean that's kind of like the thing that I created. So I still use all the bio crop steering protocols, which is what that is if you look at agronomy, you have timing, placement, and amount of fertilizer. Those are all like 3 factors that are involved when we're talking about fertilization of crops. And when it comes to biology and specific consortiums of biology, you can kind of take the same approach. Is at what time should I apply it? how much should I apply? And, you know, it has the same kind of the benefits. Like, and here's a good example. So in most agronomic conventionally cultivated crops, they'll use something like DAP or MAP, diammonium or monoammonium phosphate, as a starter fertilizer. It contains nitrogen and phosphorus, right? Nitrogen for biomass production, phosphorus for root production. That's kind of like the saying, right? So if you were to add something, a biological that had the ability to start cycling phosphorus, but also produced something like mono or polysaccharides, which aggregate soil and protect nitrogen fixing bacteria from oxidation so they can produce nitrogenase, which is the enzyme responsible for cleaving dinitrogen and converting it into ammonium. Well, then you could apply, in theory, that microbial consortium or that microbe that does that specific biochemical work at a specific time when that plant needs those certain elements. And so that's kind of the base fundamentals of that. And so what we do is we look at what those chemical compounds are. In this case, it would be something like phosphatase and monopolysaccharides, which are biofilm production. So we look at a microbe that produces phosphatase and then also produces biofilms. And okay, it's like MicroPlus does both of those things, the bacteria in there. So when you apply that, okay, we need to apply that, right at the onset after seed germination, when the first set of true leaves are going, because that's when conventional fertilizer would be applied. So you can still do fertilizers, inorganic or organic, but applying those microbial consortiums at a certain period of time will help with those processes, where that plant needs something at a certain time. And if you know what type of work biochemically those metabolites will do, you can implement them to essentially make that work happen.
Saves a lot of ATP if you're supplying what the plant needs without it having to do it itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really great point, because phosphorus is responsible for ATP production, and it's the energy exchange currency for all cellular processes. And so if the plant is having to release hydrogen in the form of OH ions or electrons to decrease the pH to solubilize that apatite material, that phosphorus apatite material, it's taking energy away from the plant to do so. If the microbes are the ones doing the work, and it's a photosynthetic microbe, or it's getting its energy source from carbon, the plant doesn't have to expend that energy. It can uptake those nutrients. It can use those for those energy mechanics.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Brandon, are you using horizontal layered grow beds, basically the horizontal soil system that Leighton promotes?
No, I don't.
Why not, Brandon?
Well, because when we're talking about cannabis cultivation, and we're talking about soils, the most productive part of soils are typically the first 6 inches. That's why we're usually when we talk about a furrow acre slice, we're talking about the first 6 inches of soil. That's where most of the organic carbon that's being cycled back into the soil exists. So the majority of the biochemical work is happening there. I'm not saying that it doesn't, because there are root zones that extend down, but the majority of the solubility of nutrients, the exchange, the carbon cycling, the phosphorus nitrogen cycling is happening in those areas. And so typically when we're building a modified growing mix, or doing cannabis cultivation or raised beds, or we're really trying to mimic that top layer, the most productive part of those soils. And if those productive parts of soils are being maintained with, mineral matrix, you have to remember that a modified growing mix is about 45% organic material and only about 5% lithosphere. Well, a conventional ag soil is about 5% organic material on a good case and about 45% lithosphere. So those things are flipped. The lithosphere part of soil is the component, that mineral apatite that has to be solubilized through the organic component to liberate nutrient ions to help create soil structure. But in a lot of these modified growing mixes that we're using, we don't have to rely on the mineralization of parent apatite material because we're usually adding in that mineral component in the form of things like gypsum, rock phos, and other forms of mineral inputs, potassium phosphate, magnesium sulfate, calcium silica, etc. And so it just functions completely differently when we're talking about scaled production. We're not trying to really mimic what Mother Nature does on a larger scale when it comes to 5 feet, 6 feet of soil depth profile. What we're really looking at is just a really fast turnover of organic carbon and nutrients. And so that's what I'm mainly focused on.
And you use a super soil, just to be clear.
So, what I use is a peat-based or a cocoa-based mix that usually contains compost, some organic amendments, but a majority mineral inputs like calcium silica, gypsum, naturally occurring mineral sulfates. And what happens in a modified system versus an agronomic system is the amount of carbon, 45% in a modified growing mix versus 5% in an ag setting. Ideal situation in ag setting, 5%. Usually it's lower than that. But what happens is that organic carbon actually solubilizes that lithosphere at an exponentially higher rate, especially in the environmental conditions that we're typically cultivating in: high humidity, high hydrology, high temperature. And so the solubility of the nutrients that are derived from those mineral components are exponentially higher than what you would see in a conventional agriculture soil. And so a modified growing mix works more like a hydroponic media than it does a soil media. Now, if I was to go and take my dirt from outside and try to build a soil bed, well, that wouldn't even work because it's mostly sand. Even if I put in, if I layered in rocks, I would have to layer in, rocks, compost, wood chips. I'd have to literally do a bunch of different things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to have a really good result simply because the soil itself is really poor. It doesn't hold water. It doesn't have a good ECE. It doesn't have a good nutrient profile. So it would take time to break down any type of compost, leaf mulch, logs, mineral elements, to release those ions into like an organic component to make that really productive. So, when it comes to agronomic outdoor soils, you can pretty much do anything to them and it'll create a net positive benefit. And it's because 98% of the world's soils don't have enough carbon or nutrients to sustain agricultural crops. So if you do a compost tea, it's going to have a benefit. If you throw a little bit of nitrogen on it, it's going to have a benefit. If you could fucking piss on it and it'll have, it'll have a benefit. Thing is that when you have soil conditions where your nutritional values and your fertility and your carbon is so low that pretty much anything that you put onto it will have a net positive benefit.
Mm-hmm. So you're not keeping? Are you recycling your soils or what you're using as a growing media at all?
Yeah, the media never gets thrown out. It's an organic media, and then most of the inputs are mineral, right? Because in these modified growing mixes, we're talking about peat or cocoa. Those are all organic substrates. We're talking about compost, 50 to maybe 60% carbon by volume. Then we're looking at the meals that are usually used for nitrogen inputs, blood meal, alfalfa, soybean meal, whatever, 85% carbon by volume. You're creating a substrate that has got a lot of carbon, but it doesn't have a lot of parent apatite material. The apatite material in natural soils is what liberates your your copper, your zinc, your manganese, your iron, your calcium, your magnesium, your potassium. All of these metal ions are trapped in a mineral matrix. If you're using like a modified mix, I'm always adding a mineral component. I don't focus a lot on the organic component, right? Like a lot of meals, I don't overdo meals. I don't do compost. I don't do a lot of that stuff. I'm not focused because the base of that already has enough carbon. What I'm trying to focus on is bringing in a mineral component, right? Because it's that mineral component that carbon, that 45%, carbon is going to solubilize. I want to kind of increase that mineral carbon content, or that mineral content, so that the carbon can kind of chelate and work on it. Does it make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you said, you're essentially like more drifting in toward the hydroponic aspect, where you're just adding the minerals into the matrix that makes it easy for the plants to uptake.
Yeah. Well, the
So
biology solubilizes them because of the high carbon content because that's energy. And so there's a rapid turnover of the mineral component. And so the biological component or the carbon component of those medias are always much higher. And that's vice versa in agronomic conditions.
Yep.
We're going to jump to this one here. Hey, Ken, how do you feel about putting rocks on the base of a pot, then filling in with soil? So I'll throw that to you guys.
I mean, if you think that you're going to run into a problem where you need to flush your soil, which I don't recommend flushing soil unless you have some type of excess, or you have some type of problem where you having antagonistic relationships between nutrients. Typically what I'm doing is I'm looking at data, and I'm not adding more than what the crop requires for an entire run. That way it can run through all the nutrients that it needs, but as it reaches maturity, those levels have decreased because they're no longer taking up as much. I don't run anything in the bottom of my pots or anything like that because I don't have any runoff and I'm not trying to flush anything. It could definitely be beneficial if you are sitting on the ground, though. Like if you're sitting on ground where you could get flooding, or you could get water that can't drain in the conditions where you get like too much water, or you're in outdoor condition. Like, you definitely want to help drain some of that so you don't cause anaerobic conditions. So it just depends on, I think it really depends on, it's contingent on, what's happening, or your system that you're running, or the environmental conditions.
Leighton, your thoughts?
Well, I wouldn't just add gravel. I mean, typically the old pot culture, and I'm not talking about cannabis, I'm talking about in Europe where they would grow topiary in these giant clay pots. They would often take clay pot shards and throw them in the bottom of the pot. And that was for water storage capacity, not for anaerobic zones. I mean, yeah, that would also allow excess moisture to drain out because it wouldn't turn into
that if you had a really porous material, it could definitely help with water holding capacity. But if you're working with something like granite or like a stone, those things aren't going to hold on to any water.
No, and if the organic matter washes down in between those chunks of stone, now you're going to have a real issue, because you can't get it out. So that's why typically I tell people to use sand. So yeah, throw some rock in there for the minerals and different colors, because different colors represent different minerals. But then wash in the sand and smooth it out to make sure that you have no pockets left. That's called a sand filter. So not only does it store the water away in a manner that will not go anaerobic. But you'll get the attributes of having the sand and the rock as a long-term nutrient storage for the microbes.
Yeah,
So
and that's more for a long term, like with your horizontal soil system. It's never changed, just added a little bit to. So in normal pots, unless you're doing a house plant where you're not transplanting on a regular basis, then it makes sense to have that soil structure like Leighton has set up, because it's got all of the different layers of biology, the anaerobic, the aerobic, and the effector of microorganisms that travel back and forth to move nutrients up and down. So other than that, like Brandon, you're doing fantastic because you are reusing your soil, and you're using pots. But the guys that we have on, we've got one commercial grower that's using Leighton's system that never does anything really to his soil. He just keeps the system running, and it's just getting better and better as the biology matures in the system.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Ken, that we didn't really cover. And again, the theory is that the horizontal soil system is water only, and you can still get a killer crop and a killer yield. And it has shown that it is effective in that regard. But with that system, I'm making sure that the people are inoculating with huge varieties of microbes, whereas you're steering with your specific microbes and your specific inputs. So it's a different animal completely. They're not even comparable, and that's why he's having such great success, is that he has dialed it into that level. Whereas this other person wants it hands off, easy, just water only, don't have to do nothing. So it's a different growing style more than anything.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that you asked that question, because that we did not make clear is that again, Brandon's using a specific community or consortium of microbes, not like my version of diversity.
Yeah. Well, Brandon's targeting everything, and that's fantastic, because to switch to flower is a whole different set of nutrients, biology, and organic material to switch from flower or from veg to flower, and Brandon's got that dialed in. That's one of the reasons I love watching Brandon and his content, is because he does have that all dialed in.
Agreed.
So we got one last question here. Any tips on a 90-day flower pheno where leaves die back at 75 days? I know super general, but looks healthy, and then last 2 weeks they curl back and die. Sativa type sensitive.
It's probably calcium and probably potassium. I would recommend that if you're going to grow a variety that's going to take that long, ramp up your calcium and your nitrogen levels in veg, and then when you transition, make sure that you have adequate calcium and potassium levels, because those are going to be the two main things that really determine whether or not you're going to end up with quality. I think calcium should be really considered a macronutrient in cannabis crop production, because the amount that is used and the amount that the plant can uptake and store, I've seen all the way up to 8.5% in leaf tissue. My target is 4.5 to 5.5, so 8.5% is crazy. But I've seen it, and no ill effect. There's no such thing as toxicity when it comes to calcium, and I think it's one of the biggest things that can be implemented that can you can be really successful with. Also, if you're going to run something that takes 90 days, you might try decreasing your the amount of time your lights are on. That might help as well. Faster flower onset. Maybe do like 10 hours in flower.
And that's a really good suggestion on calcium, because the plant can store the calcium in its own tissue without any ill effect, and then pull it as it needs it as just
No,
as
it can't.
easily.
It can't pull it. No, that's one of the negative things about calcium. So calcium can be stored in place to wherever it lands. It only moves through mass flow. And so wherever it lands in the plant, it can't be translocated. It's not like nitrogen where calcium can be moved from lower parts of the plant to concentration of growth at the top. It's why vapor pressure deficit and plant transpiration is so important when it comes to calcium movement in cannabis. If your VPD is not on point, then you're not getting enough calcium, and if you're not getting enough calcium, your harvests are going to lack in cannabis. It's just
Interesting. I wonder if that's only cannabis specific, because
no,
in,
it's in all plants. So calcium is not considered a mobile nutrient.
No, I thought it was.
we've seen evidence in leaf tissue and sap tissue that it is mobile.
No, I mean it can move short distances for chemical messaging, but it's not like nitrogen. It's not mobile like that.
Interesting. Well, all of the work in the leaf tissue and sap tissue are showing the opposite, but I'm not a scientist on that level, so I'll trust your experience. But the other thing that we do know is that calcium can be stored on the cation exchange sites and reserved as needed, so it can pull it later as it needs.
Yeah, I mean the majority of your base solution in any type of soil is going to be calcium. It's usually about 55 to 65%, followed by potassium and then magnesium. So when we're looking at it from an agronomic perspective, the majority of what's actually in solution when we're talking about plant nutrient uptake is calcium. You obviously want to have a good amount of micronutrients, NPK, and stuff like that. But I think people's estimations of what's needed for nutrients, especially in cannabis cultivation, is grossly overestimated.
Well, that's true with agriculture as well. That
Yeah.
they want to sell you more. Right?
Well, and the thing is, if you can increase the use efficiency of what you're doing, you can use far less, because what you're putting down is actually getting into the plant's tissue.
Agreed. Not washing down and further into the soil.
And
Yeah.
for that, you
And
need
one
the
of the cool things,
biology.
one of the cool things about the humates is that it's not just plant food, but it's microbe food too. So anything that's not being acquired by the plant is being utilized by the biology in the soil.
Agreed. 100%.
And it's that biology that's the key to cell production, so the key to growth. But we had another question come in. Not enough is said about micronutrients and especially trace minerals. Enlighten us on that subject.
Yeah, there's not a lot of research. So micronutrients, obvious, they're super obvious. There's plenty of science out there that says, hey, this is what this does. This is what this does. Manganese is responsible for a lot of reproductive enzymes, and iron is responsible for a lot of growth enzymes. And there's all these different things do a plethora of different things. They're all needed in specific quantities. But when it comes to trace elements, there's not a lot of information especially when it comes to cannabis cultivation. There are some, like, cobalt being used in, apple orchard cultivation, and how it can, work synergistically with calcium uptake and stuff like that. But there's not a lot of research when it comes to trace minerals. When it comes to trace minerals, I think that there might be some benefit when it comes to having those in soils, when it comes to maybe some microorganism might be utilizing it in some form. But I don't really focus on things that don't, like, if something's not going to have a drastic impact, and if the impact of one thing being so small it's almost immeasurable, I try not to focus too much time or research on it. The only thing that I can really speak on when it comes to non-essential mineral elements really is silica. And silica is great because it's taken up as monosalicylic acid, but that's a negative. It has a negative charge associated with it, so it can help balance out some of the cationic nutrients that are always uptaken: calcium, magnesium, potassium, ammonium. zinc, copper, iron, manganese, they all create positive charge within the plant. The plant has to balance that electrochemical gradient. And so it does so by using negatively charged ions like sulfate, like phosphate, like nitrate, and silica can also help mitigate some of the electrochemical gradient, or they have to dump protons and electrons through root exudation. But, some of those may contribute to that process. I know silica does, definitely. But I haven't seen any, I haven't come across any research, or I haven't personally done any research, a lot of research when it comes to trace minerals.
Mm-hmm.
Well said.
Well,
Yeah,
guys,
so-
we're at 2 hours.
Yeah.
That went quick. Well, Brandon, I really appreciate you taking the time to come out here and talk to us on this level. It's really great to get another perspective about both what you're doing, and I deeply appreciate the work that you're doing on carbon sequestering, because I think that is going to be the future. Rebuilding our soils has to start with carbon. The more we get in there, the better off we are. The only thing that we really didn't talk about today was carbon as a nutrient. And again, that's not something that's really discussed very often. And its ability.
Well, the way that it works is, we have this really inefficient system, which is the ribisco. It's ribulose 1,5-biphosphate carbulose oxygenase, which is the enzyme that basically cleaves the CO2 molecule. It turns it into carbon monoxide. It transports an oxygen molecule across electron transport chain, combines the carbon with hydrogen and oxygen from the splitting of water. But carbon itself really is just used to create carbohydrates. The benefit of that, it's really inefficient because we have such low carbon levels in our atmosphere. So the ribisco enzyme is really inefficient, and it's the carbon dioxide is mixed with, other elements that the plant is taking in through the stomata. It's really actually inefficient. It was more efficient, 400 million years ago, when there was a lot more carbon in our atmosphere. Unfortunately, that's not conducive to human growth. So we kind of live in this weird, we're in this weird zone where, if we, carbon is good for plants, which gives I don't know. It's like the enemy is definitely not carbon, but the I lost my train of thought.
That's right. Maybe this will jumpstart you. Carbon is also very, very important in microbial work and activity.
It's fuel. All carbon. If you look at carbon as a fuel source, we use hydrocarbons. The energy that's produced from the splitting of hydrogen from carbon, it produces energy. The byproduct being carbon dioxide. Plants use carbon dioxide. It's inefficient, but they do it. They breathe oxygen, or we breathe oxygen because of plants. They produce it. They also produce CO2. I don't know. It's microbial fuel. It's
one of the base building blocks of life is because everything is carbon based.
Yeah, it's just really inefficient. The thing, and, they can use carbon will create soluble carbon, which will attach to nutrients and help with transport, for passive transport. Carbon does a lot of different things. I mean, I have just so much information. I can't even always organize all the information that I have in my brain.
It's all right. I get that. All right. Well, listen, let's kill it at this point. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us and laying down all that information. Much appreciate you, sir, and all the hard work you're doing. Ken, as always, thank you for all behind the scenes work and pulling this podcast together on a weekly basis. And to the audience, thanks for joining us, and hope you got something out of today.
See y'all soon.
All right, guys. See you later.